Welcome to Coffee Talks with Dan Norton and David Person.
Daniel Norton, May 5th, Cinco de Pokémonayo, or Cinco de Mayo, depending on if you're not necessarily a Pokemon collector. So, Dan, I did the inevitable. I had several Modelos prior to our little talk today. And
Okay.
so I think it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it. I'm not sure. Dan, what do you do? Because I know you're not a huge Modelo drinker, if at all, because you're either like liquor intolerant and lactose intolerant. You're also regular color of your hair intolerant. So, Dan, what do you do to celebrate the iconic Cinco de Mayo holiday?
Actually, nothing. We've had a pretty relaxing day because Law got back from Milwaukee last night. So we just caught up on some sleep, and then I watched the end of the World Snooker Championships, which ended today.
Fantastic, Dan. You live such an exciting life. Like I think my life is exciting, and then I compare to you. No, no, I shouldn't even bother to compare. It's a loser's challenge.
It
Dan,
looked like it
I
was
just
going to be
want
an exciting final, and then it looked like there was going to be a huge comeback on, and then the player who was out ahead won.
to. Okay, all right.
So.
Thanks for updating us all, Dan. I know it was right there. Everybody wanted like edge of their seat stuff. Dan, I did want to find out, was there anything particularly exciting at the culmination of Floor's endeavor into the regionals at Milwaukee this last weekend? Anything you want to tell the audience about that?
Well, something worked out nice for you, because it turned out that the judge support that all the staff got paid out were non-enhanced booster boxes. So Laura got one booster box for working one day in addition to other stuff. So we don't need a non-enhanced booster box for you now because you can have that one from us.
Fantastic, Dan. That's great news. You know what? I believe everything in my life is naturally unenhanced, notwithstanding surgical situations I've had that I won't want to talk about on air. But those of you that joined Dan Patreon, I can assure you I'll be speaking about it there. So for a small stipend, you can find out about every single surgery I've had and why. Outcomes, challenges. It's something I would do if I were you, but then again, I'm not there to spend your money. Dan, we have some discussions yesterday, and we were talking about highlight reel stuff. No, actually, I was going to talk about. So we'll do highlight reels in a minute. We were talking about subscriber stuff.
Yeah.
And you had somebody come on and this today or whatever, because you know what, guys, when you're watching, if I'm within 24 hours of where I'm supposed to be between posting and doing and editing and actually putting it out there, just let it go. Okay, let it go. So we had somebody out there that basically said, I don't like you guys. You're boring. It was cute. Because you know what? You're not supposed to like us. We are boring. You're just supposed to watch us and see what kind of tolerance for pain you have. But the thing is, Dan, how do you keep increasing subscribers? That's really what my question is. So we have this other comment from Sarah. This was a while back, not the negative one of the current video. And by the way, I like every single. Sometimes we have the nastiest comments, and I still like them. And my wife goes, "Why do you like them? Like that couldn't be a nastier comment." I go, "Because somebody took the time and effort. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion." But Dan, how does your subscriber count continue to grow? And here's what I'm really asking: if we're not talking about boosting and all the other stuff you were kind of covering in this last video, and we're just talking about the fact that you go from 10,000 and all of a sudden we're at 10,500. Is that really happening, Dan? Is that happening? Because how can we go up 500, not we, but you, when we only have 100 views on a video, and they're invariably going to be the people that are always watching, like Stephen Kassoon and Craig and all of our friends, and I should name all of your names, but once you're drinking this much, you don't really know who you're talking to anymore. I don't understand the math, Dan. Tell me what's right or what's wrong.
Well, so there's still boosted videos going. Like when I boost a video, I do it for a 2-week period. So
Okay.
we've still got one running. But also, even if one of our Coffee Talks is getting 200 views, even if 150 or 175 of those are our regulars, if like 25 new people of video or whatever are clicking on it in the sidebar, maybe a couple of them are subscribing, maybe a few of those are liking it. I will say the one we put out 2 days ago that the person commented on, I can totally understand why someone would not want to subscribe from if that's the first time they're seeing us, because it was just kind of going into stuff and responding to comments rather than an actual Pokemon topic. It didn't really fit with what we normally do on the channel. It was a bit of an off video, but we maybe just get a few subscribers here and there from every new video. Like, I think that's something that happens.
Dan, where does the negative energy come from? So obviously there are two different kinds of people. And in fact, if you wanted to actually do the mathematics properly, there's probably a billion different kind of people. But what is the difference between someone who must tell you that you suck as a podcaster and as a topic talker, and then say, I will never watch you again, versus someone else who just watches, doesn't like it, and never watches again? What does that person gain, Dan? Why did they need to go into such a negative spirited, you know, diatribe about what they had just seen?
I mean, maybe they just thought it was constructive feedback, which, stuff like that kind of comment saying that the initial few minutes of that podcast they found boring. I mean, I did kind of know that because of the topic of the podcast, but it is good feedback if you're commenting on a video just saying, like, this didn't get going quick enough. Maybe you didn't get to the initial topic quick enough. I mean, like today, we've got a main topic and we're already 6 minutes in and we haven't hit it yet. So maybe that's just something people don't like. I don't mind getting negative comments if it's actual good feedback. Like I've said before, and I said to someone online where someone once just said to me, "Oh, your logo's crap." And I said, "Well, what's wrong with it?" And they said, "I don't like it." Or, "I don't like the font. I don't like the font on your logo." I said, "Well, why? What do you think's wrong with it?" "Oh, it's rubbish." They said it in not as nice words as that, but I'm a family-friendly channel. That's not constructive criticism. Just saying this is crap is not constructive. But saying that they thought that it was too boring or that we didn't get to topics fast enough, that kind of thing is constructive criticism. Like when I said we had feedback about the length of the introduction, and that's why we cut it down, or how much negative space there was on the actual video overlay, which is why I changed the aspect ratios of our faces so we take up more of the screen. Constructive feedback like that, it is negative feedback, but it's useful. It is good.
Dan, you just called yourself a family-friendly channel, and I want to be really honest with you here. Do you believe that your hair is actually family-friendly? Do you believe these parents want their children to see your hair and believe that's a part of what the Pokemon hobby should be including?
I mean, I think it's better than them being called homophobic slurs or ableist slurs, which a lot of the other channels are doing.
Okay, Dan, point well taken. And Dan, you just alluded to the fact that, you know what, we may not get to topics soon enough because I'm always seem to be talking about something that's unimportant. And so you're like, we're 6 minutes in, we're 7 minutes in, we're 8 minutes in. Does that really bother you, Dan? Like, isn't it the case that when I watch you watch your podcasters, when you're at my house sorting my cards and doing all the rest, you're watching some British version of nothing. Actually, it's sort of like a mystery thing. But don't talk about it because nobody cares, Dan. But it is fun to watch you watch it. Dan, I feel like those are your family members and you kind of think of them as your family members. Aren't we creating something here that we want people to think about us as their family members and that they're interested to hear what we're talking about the next day and the next day and the next day? Because we're kind of like, just in their living rooms with them?
Yeah, I like it. I like the back and forth that we have. There's a podcast I've been listening to a lot lately called Have a Word, which is a comedy podcast with a few different people on, and they even do it where even the episodes where they have guests, most of their episodes they have guests, but the first half of the episode is just the hosts talking amongst themselves and what they've been doing in the week, and then the second half of their episode is that's when they bring the guests in, because the audience they built up just liked the interaction between the hosts enough that they said, "Oh, maybe guests will ruin it." So that's why they did half and half episodes. So it's one of those where we really have to get people to like us. I mean, maybe if you jump in at the wrong episode, like I say, the last episode was not a great one to start with, but maybe if you find the right episode and you get going with it, people are going to like this kind of thing.
So, with respect to people finding us and understanding us and getting a chance to get to know us and those kinds of things, which ideally we love that. Can you talk about your lack of use of highlight reels? Because I know that people have talked with you about this on multiple occasions. So I'm
Yeah.
thinking about Pikachu, who just did a podcast with me. I think he's done one with you before. And I know that Pokemon Wonder has done one with me recently. And they follow those podcasts later on with snippets that they cut out that are called highlight reels. Maybe they post them to Instagram or somewhere else. Maybe it's not necessarily YouTube. I don't know, nor do I care. But the point is, every time I sort of bring that up, you say something like, well, we're not interesting enough. I can't pull a single snippet from us. We have snippets where we're arguing, laughing, crying. Sometimes I'm so mad at you, I just want to pull out whatever hair I still have left. And you seem to say that none of that's important to anybody. Nobody would like to watch it, and yet they're supposed to watch our podcast. Why aren't we pulling anything out and trying to boost organically rather than financially?
Well, no, when I said that I didn't pull out the clips and stuff, that was when we were talking about creating additional YouTube videos on days where we weren't making podcasts. The highlights for things like TikTok and Instagram, it's just because the skills I'm developing skills in the video editing, I'm trying to make the actual podcasts better. I haven't learned how to do that yet. It's Law found out someone recommended a software to Law over the weekend when Law was up in Milwaukee, which I need to look into, which apparently can do it automatically. Can start trying to look at that. So that I've got that on my list to do some research into and see if that's something I can use to just make these clips really quick and easy. But it's just a case of learning the skills and taking the time to do that, which when I have time, I've been putting more time into in actually developing the podcast, more time into, housework and stuff. I have a lot going on.
So anybody watching, and I know I've said this before, Dan seems to get to this point every time, and I must keep pushing him for his own good. I know that one time I did a reel on Instagram. I did it with the help of my children, and I know that if I wanted to do one again, and I do, I'm going to go back to them and I'm going to template out just the same way I do Instagram posts now, because somebody came to town one time and I asked them how to do it, and they gave me a template of how to do it, and I was able to follow that. And so I do that fairly regularly now on my daily type of Instagram posts. And I did that once on a reel, and I actually then was told by my children how I could promote the reel as well. So anybody watching, if you think that you have a simple way to help Dan do this without him having to go through all the learning curve, I'd be very appreciative of you and any suggestion and saying, show Dan how to do this one time in some fashion that might be simplistic, more simplistic than he might be realizing, so that he can boost the videos that are particularly good. And I think that's nice because, as you guys know, 6 out of every 7 videos we do suck. And so the point about that is, let's get that one out there that people really deserve to see. They don't really care about, controversies in the hobby, but Build-A-Bear cards, they love them. They want to build the love of the Build-A-Bears. So we've got to find those and get it out. That's a bad example. It was already promoted. All right, Dan, here is the next question, or the topic of the day. The topic of the day, Dan, I came to you a few days ago and I said, Dan, the most successful grossing tour in the world was the Taylor Swift Eras tour. And I don't care what you think, Dan. I know you're not a big, pop singer fan. I don't care because, and especially if it's not coming out of the UK or something, that's on you, Dan. That's not on us. This is a USA based podcast. So I told Dan about that tour and how much money she grossed, and it was amazing, and it was the most popular, and everybody around the world knew, and they're all wearing her bracelets and stuff. And Dad said, why don't we do the same thing, but without having to travel the world? He said, I can do an eras tour of the different eras of Pokemon cards. And I thought that was a great idea. So I said, Dan, that's a great idea because I know nothing about them. When you say to me that there's a Sun and Moon era and a Sword and Shield and a Scarlet and Violet, all it means is that at some point they stopped making sets and put a new name before the other names of the sets. And I don't know why that is and what differentiates them one from another. So our good friend, Dan, I'm never boring as people claim me to be, Norton of the Columbus, Ohio Nortons, is ready to go. Dan, throw it on us.
Well, so most of the reason that stuff changes and the era name changes is when they release a new video game. So when they release a new video game for Pokemon, they release a new generation of Pokemon. They have a full new, usually about 100, 150 new Pokemon. It's a full new location. It's all new characters. That's when the card game changes, era-wise. Sometimes there's a little bit of a difference, and often there will be, I think other than the first 2 generations, the eras have been named after the games. So, or at least the first set of the era has been named after the games, and then sometimes they'll have a subtitle. So obviously starting off with a base set, it's where you start with Generation 1, base set, it's your classic card layout that most people will recognize. That card layout stayed through at least all of Generation 1. Generation 1 went up to Gym Challenge. So you had Base, Jungle, Fossil, Base at 2, Team Rocket, Gym Heroes, Gym Challenge. So that was all of Generation 1. There was a few different gimmicks in there. Obviously, once they'd done the first 3 sets that had every Pokemon released, Base Set 2 was a reprint set. Team Rocket was based around, Team Rocket, the evil team. You had Dark Pokemon, Gym Heroes, Gym Challenge. Those were Gym Leaders Pokemon. Generation 2 started off with Neo Genesis. So this is all still within the WotC era. WotC covered Gen 1, Gen 2. Neo Genesis, Discovery, Revelation, and Destiny were the sets that basically introduced Generation 2. I think all Generation 2 Pokemon had been introduced by Neo Revelations. Obviously, they did some Shining Pokemon and stuff near the end of that. And Neo Destiny had Light and Dark Pokemon back. It's another bit of a gimmick once all Pokemon had been introduced. Legendary Collection after that was another reprint set, and that's where they introduced Reverse Hollows. And then the Expedition Acropolis Skyridge, that was the end of WotC era. Those were the e-reader cards. That's where cards take on a new form. You're scanning the cards into the actual e-reader, you get extra data things with them, and that rounds out the WotC era.
Dan, let me just stop you real quick. Why did the e-reader era, why did those e-reader cards never stick, never carry on? Because the reason I ask that is because, as we know today, technology is such a big thing, right? We find and we evolve new technologies, and we don't typically go backwards unless there's certain administrations in the United States who believe we should go back to factories from the 1920s with our employees. But independent of that, why did we not stay with the new technology? Why did it not go anywhere?
Well, so it did keep going for a few sets into the Nintendo era, into Generation 3, but mainly it was because they didn't actually do anything in the game of Pokemon. It had a fun thing where sometimes if you scanned them into your Game Boy Advance, it would tell you extra attacks and stuff that the card could do, theoretically, but you couldn't actually do that in competition. Also, the way you had to do it, they would heavily damage the cards just because you had to physically scan them through an e-reader. So I think it was just a bit of a gimmick that not enough people enjoyed, and it tied the card game too much to needing, you needed a Game Boy Advance and you needed this e-reader peripheral, which wasn't a popular thing overall. And there's a lot of times, as we've seen, a lot of card players and a lot of card collectors aren't into the video games that much. With the younger audience and people who are Pokemon fans as a whole, who collect the cards and play the video games, they're less likely to be the tournament players or anything, and they would like the cards regardless of what they did. Yeah, so it was just a bit of a gimmick that didn't really appeal to enough people, I don't think.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Go ahead. Continue.
I mean, there have been a lot of other card games that have tried different things like scanning mechanics on cards, and they've, as a whole, never really been popular. Lots of different people have tried them, and the games have never really stuck around for too long. So I think it's just something where people who like card games, they just like to have the cards. They like to just do stuff with the cards. They don't want to worry about all this extra technology that they need.
All right. That just brings up one other thing. I'll move on because I don't want to get off track for sure. But I know that, I once made a post on the original cards. There were Pokemon cards, and then they were Pukemon cards, right? They were like a takeoff in the beginning,
parody
of trying to make fun of Pokemon. So is it true that you're looking to make a card game called Metapoo? Is that something that you really are legitimately trying to do?
No, that's not. I'm sure someone's done it, but that's not
Okay.
me. The new
All right.
MetaZoo, I like the new MetaZoo. It looks really nice.
I'm not asking if you like MetaZoo. I'm asking if you'd like to make some money by trying to make a parody game. That's all. And I figured you, of all people, with your sense of humor, for sure would do that. All right, Dan, what generation are on and what are we moving to now?
Well, moving on to Generation 3, this is starting with the Ruby Sapphire games. So this is when Nintendo takes over the license from WotC. It just worked out that way. I think, WotC's license was coming to an end, and Nintendo took over, and it just coincided nicely that they were doing it with the start of a new generation. Like I say, the e-reader technology did continue for a few sets into the Ruby Sapphire era. So it was Ruby Sapphire, Sandstorm, and Dragon still had the e-reader dot codes on cards. But there was a full layout redesign starting with Ruby Sapphire as well. Like the cards look a lot more like you would expect, like you would think of cards going forward. It moved away from what we think of as the classic design of Pokemon. And this Ruby Sapphire introduced EX cards. That's lowercase EX, and they were kind of the next step up of playable cards. Things like the Shinings and the Crystals were big chase cards for collectors during sets, but there was just a few of them, and it was more a collector chase thing, I believe, rather than a tournament playable push. Whereas these EX cards, they were seen in most tournament decks going all the way through the EX era. So I'd say the EX era was one that was named it was EX Ruby Sapphire, EX Sandstorm, EX Dragon. They weren't called like Ruby Sapphire Sandstorm, Ruby Sapphire Dragon. And we also had, obviously Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emeralds during that era, which were named after games as well, just new games that were coming out. And of course, we had the Gold Stars, which were introduced partway through the EX era as like another big level of chase card. Although those were quite tournament playable, there was a decent chunk of those saw some level of tournament play, and there's even a couple of them which have been in World Championship decks. They won or made the top 4 of Worlds, those Gold Stars. They were designed as very, very powerful cards because the rule is you can only have one Gold Star total in your deck. So the ability is very, very powerful on all of them. It's just you had to make sure it fit correctly into your deck. I don't think it was a case of, every deck wanted a Gold Star. Like, currently there's ace specs, which are trainers, which you can only play one of total per deck. And basically every deck has an ace spec. You just decide which one is best for you. The Gold Stars, I think, was more if your strategy fit. But they were a nice chase card throughout the end of the EX era. Next era was Diamond and Pearl, which we got kind of a full reset. We're done with EXs. We're done with Gold Stars. It's level X's is the new big mechanic. And these were different from EXs because these actually evolved from the Pokemon with the same name. So, in the EX era, if you have a Gardevoir EX, you evolve Ralts into Curlier, into Gardevoir EX. But with level X's, the original base set of Diamond and Pearl had Torterra, Infernape, Empoleon, but you evolved into Empoleon, then evolved into Empoleon level X. It was like a boosted version of the same Pokemon. And the Diamond and Pearl era was named, Diamond and Pearl Mysterious Treasures, Diamond and Pearl Secret Wonders. And partway through that era, it switched to Platinum when the Platinum game came out, and we had a few sets that were Platinum Rising Rivals, but they stuck with the level X motif all the way through the Diamond Pearl and Platinum era. Next era after that was HGSS, Heart Gold Soul Silver. That was a short era because Heart Gold Soul Silver was a remake game similar to, Fire Red, Leaf Green. It came out pretty close to the release of the next generation, which was going to be Black and White. So there was only a handful of sets in Heart Gold Soul Silver. But again, the cards got a nice redesign, and the borders of Heart Gold Soul Silver era are very distinctive because they have gold and silver in the borders rather than just being the solid yellow border. So they look really nice. And the kind of chase cards, higher end playable cards in these sets were, you had the primes, which were more powerful versions of Pokemon, but you evolved just into them as normally. I think maybe some of them were basic. And then there were the legend cards, which were cards that came in two halves. Like you got either the top half or the bottom half of the legend. So it wasn't a Pokemon you could start with in play, was the rule. It couldn't be a starting Pokemon, and you had to have both pieces in your hand at the same time to play them both out to your bench to get that into play. And I think they gave up more prize cards than normal, but they still saw quite a bit of competitive play, both the primes and the legends.
When you get to Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and I know you're probably going to talk of Call of Legends here in a moment, but
Yeah.
were do you feel like they made any mistakes so far? So, going back from EX and then through the next eras and, all these Diamond Pearl, everything you're talking about, did they forget to bring something along that you would have liked to have seen brought along? Like, oh, I really love this, and I don't think they should have just let that go as quickly. And now we're into this new mechanic, and we're new to this. You move up to the level X, or you move up to Prime, or whatever. You know, why did they have to change everything? Why? I mean, I understand the evolution of a game, but Do you think
Yeah.
sometimes change for change's sake, people would have loved to have something from those older games that they don't have anymore?
No, because as we're going to see later, as we get into the later eras, things like Rainbow Rares stayed for, in my opinion, way too long. And we'll talk about full art Pokemon and stuff too coming up. Stuff like that, the longer it stays, the less popular it becomes. Because there is a case of overstaying its welcome. I mean, the gold stars are classics. Like, people still love the gold stars. And one of the reasons is there's only, I think, like 27 of them released during the original run. There was like 1 or 2 years later as like a special throwback. But the fact that there was so limited, there was so few of them, it kept them special, you know? And I think that's something that we lose in later generations when you just keep adding stuff rather than changing stuff.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. We call that keep them wanting more. So
Yeah.
you're going to do something for a lesser amount of time so that people actually want more of it as time goes on. So yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I think it is that whole thing of card games moving to. There's a big thing that that Magic has openly said, like Magic the Gathering have said in their design when they've had criticisms for stuff they've done, like Secret Lairs and other stuff, which I won't get too into, but they've said that their philosophy is they know that not all of Magic is going to be for everyone, and they want to make sure that everyone wants something from Magic, even if no one wants all of it, which is kind of the route you can think of that Pokemon went in some generations, where it was like, oh well, some people like the full art, so we've got to keep the full arts, and we've added the rainbows, but some people like the rainbows, so we've got to keep the rainbows, and we've got the golds, and some people like the golds, so we've got to keep the golds, and you just end up with sets that have way too much stuff in them because they're trying to appeal to everyone at once. And as it turns out, they're making sets that are pretty lackluster because no one, as we've talked about for a long time, no one was attempting to collect sets because they were just too bloated and there was so much stuff that they didn't want. Like, you know, if you like the full art, like, I mean, if you look at these sets, if you love level X's, you're going to collect the Diamond and Pearl era sets. That's what people are going to do. If you love Gold Stars, you're going to look at those sets. People who love Rainbow Rares, even if you love Rainbow Rares, there's too many. You know, people aren't going to go, I'm going to get every Rainbow Rare. There's maybe 1 or 2 people doing that, but even the people that love Rainbow Rares, most of them are going, yeah, I'm going to pick out my favorite Rainbow Rares, or I'm going to pick out my favorite Pokemon that got Rainbow Rares because there's 300 different Rainbow Rares. You know, it's different when there's only 27. When there's 27, or even with EXs, if there's 100 or something, people will go, oh yeah, I'm going to collect them all because it's a very low number. When there's too many, people just cut down even further and pick and choose.
So I want you to get through the different eras, but I have one more question before you continue and hopefully get it done. So you mentioned that new games bring new characters, new locations, might bring 100, 150 characters, whatever. And of course, you know, I don't spend enough time opening my binders and enjoying them to be able to verify whether or not what you're saying is actually true. So then I think about a Surging Sparks or whatever. I think about later sets, which, you know, that has a lot of Pikachus in it, I believe, or whatever, or the, you know, how do you know? How does a game manufacturer like this decide when to go back amongst all these new characters in a new generation and reference back the old ones? So, you know, if you say, well, okay, Destin Rivals is supposed to bring back some of the Team Rocket, and there's Charizard sets that come out and bring back some of those. How do you, you know, reconcile the two, that we're supposed to be going away from characters and yet we sort of always keep coming back to them as well?
It's generally for all of these older eras like the Neo Genesis and Diamond Pearl, Black and White, the first few sets of those eras would focus very heavily, almost exclusively, I think, on either new Pokemon or Pokemon that, you know, evolved into the new Pokemon. So like for Diamond and Pearl, they introduced a lot of new evolutions to previously existing Pokemon. So you had like Magmortar, Electivire, which evolved from Magmar and Electabuzz from Generation 1. So obviously they still had to bring Magmar and Electabuzz into these early sets, but it used to be that they would just focus very, very heavily on those new Pokemon, and then once all or almost all of those new Pokemon have been introduced, then they would start bringing more stuff back in. Often there would be some of the legendaries or the mythical Pokemon, like the event Pokemon from the end of the Pokedex, they would get left out and saved for later sets, and they'd have sets kind of based around them, sometimes to tie into a movie coming out or tie into an in-game event. But it used to be that they would do it that way. Now, because of the fact that they don't just do new Pokemon, they do new styles of Pokemon, they bring back the old characters earlier. So we talked about in XY, they introduced Mega Pokemon for the first time. We talked about that a few weeks ago when we did that. Because, Blastoise, Venusaur, Charizard got Mega Pokemon, they had Venusaur and Blastoise in the first XY set, and then the second XY set, Flashfire, was fully a Charizard set. But they could do that because they were playing off these new mega forms of the Pokemon. And then, like, within Scarlet Violet era, we had the Terra forms of the new Pokemon. So there's the crystallized Terra Pokemon, like Charizard had that. So Charizard appeared very early in the Scarlet Violet generation. In the Sword and Shield generation, we had Dynamax Pokemon, so the VMAXs. So, like, the first set of Sword and Shield had, Lapras and Snorlax as some of its big Pokemon, because they had Dynamax versions, and then we had the Charizard set with Darkness Ablaze just a couple of sets in, because they have these new forms and these new versions of Pokemon that they're bringing in for the first time.
Dan, you've often mentioned the concept of rotations, this idea that they're going to identify going forward for people that play the game what is no longer allowed in to be put into your deck. Yeah. So is that something that's done by set or by era? How does that typically work?
So it used to be done just kind of however Pokemon decided to do it. It was different year to year. They often would cut to the start of a generation, to the start of an era, every couple of years, but it used to just be kind of every year they'd rotate about 4 sets. Until there was one time where they decided not to do a rotation, just have a giant standard format, and that caused them a lot of problems, and they had to do a mid-season rotation. But now, since the start of Sword and Shield, in English, previous to that in Japan, cards have had what's called a regulation mark printed in the bottom corner. So Japan started earlier. They started from the letter A, so there were sets that would have A's, B's, and C's printed on cards. Sword and Shield start with D, I believe, and we're now up to, I think, maybe H or I. And now it's just, they say, cards with this regulation mark can't be played anymore. So I think we just rotated to anything with a G regulation mark onwards. And because of the way English sets work, some of them are pulled from different Japanese sets, some are Japanese promos pulled into sets. You can actually get cards within the same set which have different regulation marks. So some cards from sets can rotate at different times to others, but because they physically say on the card which regulation mark they're from, then it's a lot easier for people to deal with. Obviously, if a card gets reprinted, you can use any version. So the trainers, like Professor's Research, Boss's Orders, that kind of thing, you can use any version of that, even if it was printed with an older regulation mark, as long as there is a current version allowed.
Okay.
You said we were getting on a Call of Legends. Call of Legends was a weird one because promo-wise, it stuck with the HCSS era because, the Black Star promos, it didn't start a Call of Legends promo Black Star set. It just stayed on with Arc Gold, Soul Silver. But the set itself was completely different. It wasn't a set that existed in Japan. It was made up of, I think, like a couple of mini sets and a bunch of promos from Japan. It was a lot of stuff cobbled together in one. And it got rid of the Primes and the Legends and instead had this subset of shiny Pokemon, which was a fully collector thing. All of the cards, I think, appeared as just regular versions, just regular holos too, but none of these cards were super playable or anything. This was just a full... It was kind of a filler set, I think, because they weren't ready to release Black and White yet, but because they don't do one-to-one sets with Japan, and because TBCI internationally stays on a much more rigid schedule of 4 sets a year, whereas Japan plays about with it a bit, they had to get something to fill the gap before Black and White, which is where Call of Legends came in. So Call of Legends, actually, when it came out, was pretty unpopular with players because it only introduced like a very small number of mechanically unique cards. That there was just quite a lot of alt art reprints and stuff. Which, if it had been all alt art reprints, the players wouldn't have cared. But the fact that they had to worry about this tiny number of cards in the set, I think really annoyed the players quite a bit when it came out.
Funny.
After that, we went to black and white, which was, again, another card layout change design. And black and white is actually where they changed the set order to more go with what Japan had. So ever since Japan introduced numbering the sets, they've had it the way we do now, where it's done by type. So you get all your grass Pokemon in Pokedex order, all your fire Pokemon in Pokedex order, whatever. Before that, all sets had all of the hollows alphabetically, then the rares alphabetically, then the uncommons, then the commons, then the trainers, and then any special energy or anything. But now we do it where it's done by Pokemon type, and that started with black and white. That's where they first made that change as well. And this is the first time they introduced full art cards. You had there was the Zekrom and Reshiram in black and white base set, which had these really cool full art versions, and full art cards in one form or another haven't gone away since black and white base. They've kind of changed the full art style a few times, but since then we've had some form of full art card. And that was 2011. So that's 14 years on now. We've had some form of full art card in every set.
A lot more now, though, Dan. Right? In other words, it just feel like now there's so many more, and do you think that's just the common sense, aesthetically pleasing argument that they people feel like they get more, or there's more chase cards or something when they get those beautiful full art cards?
I mean, maybe, but we're at a point now. Like, even this was almost true by Sun and Moon era, and definitely by Sword and Shield, where a lot of these full art cards, unless they're playable, aren't even really a hit, because you can get some of them for less than the cost of a pack. If a pack's $4.50, some of these full art cards you can get for $2, because they're just, especially now, they're not as popular as the illustration rares. They're not as popular as the special illustration rares. And I will say that cheapness basically only applies to the Pokemon. The actual trainers, the full art supporter cards, are still hits. They're still, even when they have the special illustration rare versions, they're still hits, and they're still worth more than a pack, because when you have the supporter cards, it's obviously a drawing of the supporter, and there's more to the artwork. Like, there's a background to the artwork. They're usually featured in some location from the games, or if they're a professor, they're in their lab or whatever. Like, one of the coolest ones is there's the Professor Oak, where he's like got the 3 Pokeballs in front of him of Bulbasaur, Charmander, Squirtle, like the iconic scene from the start of the games where you're choosing your starter Pokemon. But the actual full arts of Pokemon are generally just a drawing of the Pokemon and then a solid color background or some kind of pattern in the background. No actual art in the background, if you get what I mean. Which I think is why, even when there was Rainbow Rares and stuff out, people just chased the full art supporters. And then obviously when alternate arts came out with like the tag teams and stuff, that's when like people had no interest in the full arts really anymore. I'd love to see full arts rotate out. I'd love to see them stop doing just regular full art Pokemon, because I don't think that anyone cares about them that much anymore. I think they should. I personally think they should do away with them. But that's just one thing, like I said, if it's overstaying its welcome. I said this a lot when Rainbow Rares were out, that they'd overstayed their welcome and needed to go away.
Yeah.
So into the black and white era, the 4th set in, we got to Dark Explorers. This introduced EX Pokemon, capital EX. And this is the first time where, because of the new Pokedex style layout, these chase cards appeared, numbered in the middle of sets rather than all grouped together at the end. Because even in the older sets, the EXs, Gold Stars, Level Xs were all right at the end even if they weren't secrets, even if they were in the main set numbering, they were all grouped together like after all the trainers and everything. But these EXs now appear just in the Pokedex slot wherever they would appear in the set numbering. Full art version stuff, of course, still ended up at the end, but the regular EXs were throughout the set. So that's where one of the big things comes with mine in law's binder setups is anything like that. I try and get an extra copy because I like to have my reverse hollows as a separate set starting from number one again, and I don't really want to leave gaps. So since then, I've tried to keep an extra one where I can of all that stuff.
It makes sense, Dan. There's no reason not to spend as much money as you can on redundancy. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then for Black and White era stayed pretty much the same after that, just EXs, full arts. Started introducing golds. There was the, lots of a few golden Pokemon, a few shiny Pokemon, a few golden trainers throughout the end of that era, which we'll see again continuing on for a while. We still got golds going on. Now, at very end of the Black and White era was a very weird set called Legendary Treasures. So it had the big chase cards were 2 full art gold Pokemon of I believe it was Reshiram and Zekrom again, and there was a Radiant collection in this one. The weird thing about this is the only set since reverse hollows were introduced where less than half of the packs have reverse hollows. There were some sets where if there were subsets, occasionally a subset card would replace your reverse hollow. So like in Unseen Forces, when you had the unknowns, it's 1 in 5-ish packs, I think you'd get a foil unknown from the subset rather than your reverse hollow. But Legendary Treasures, for some reason, because of the way they had the Radiant collection and the way they did the rares and hollows, you could get like a regular rare and a hollow in a pack, but you wouldn't get a reverse hollow. When I was looking into this, I looked through some old Pokegym posts and I found someone who said that one of the first box breakdowns they saw had only 16 reverse hollows out of 36 packs, which is wild. Like, that set is very difficult to get a full set of reverse hollows for, just because of that. That's just nothing to do with an error. That's just how they did the boxes. After Black and White, we had XY, which we've already talked about a little bit. Like I say, it was Megas, it was full arts from Megas, and then as we went through, they started introducing the golds and stuff. Again, I think Flashfire started out with like the gold Charizards and kept golds going throughout the era. Generations, one of the special sets in the middle, was an interesting one because it was one of the, I think it's the only time where full art Pokemon have appeared in the middle of the set rather than grouped together at the end. There's a couple of full art Pokemon, but they're numbered within the set as well, which is a strange one. Towards the end of the XY era as well, we had breaks, which were the sideways cards. And if you remember those, and the way you played those was you had your regular Pokemon, but then you put the break over the top so it covered the artwork, but you still saw the attacks and stuff from the regular Pokemon. I think that was one of the least popular styles of card they've ever done. I don't know anyone who loves the breaks anywhere near as much as anyone loves like EXs and Gold Stars or anything like that. The breaks were just odd. Then, obviously, right at the end of that generation, we had Evolutions, which was the classic style, like the throwback to the base set style, with all Generation 1 Pokemon, and a lot of people liked that one, but some people didn't like it. I mean, at the time, it was popular when it first came out, then it dropped right down in popularity, because when it first came out, people liked it, but they didn't like that they still had things like Mega Pokemon in it. They would have preferred it if it was just regular Pokemon, for how much of a throwback it was, really. And then it just became, people got sick of it because it and Steam Siege, the set before it, were constantly in box sets. You know, when you get these box sets for like a few new promos, and you'll normally get like 4 packs, and it'll be 2 packs of the latest set and then some older ones from earlier in the generation. Evolutions was coming out in those products for like 3 years afterwards, to the point where Evolutions was a set that no one wanted to touch at all. And I think you could probably get packs for about $1 or something, because no one wanted it. And then obviously, as soon as it went out of print, people were like, oh yeah, actually this has a reprint of base set Charizard in it. Maybe this is good after all. And it went way back up.
Well, and I think that has to do with the Logan Paul thing, right? In other words, that was when the base set box he did the break, and it was the pandemic, and everything was hotter than heck, and so that was people, to my recollection, realizing they weren't necessarily going to be able to own those vintage cards. They had surged so much in value, and so Evolutions gained immediacy immediately, I guess, in popularity, and the
Yeah,
prices,
that probably helped because I think that was probably around the time where it stopped actually getting reprinted. Yeah, I know I sold quite a bit of it during the early pandemic times because we just had stuff lying around. Like I remember I sold. I think I had 2 sealed pre-release kits, like the build and battle kits, just because there was so little I needed from the set, and I didn't need any of the promos. That it was just like, oh well, there's no point in opening these, and they weren't worth anything, so they just got put in a box. And then found them like years later. I was like, oh, these are $700 a piece now or something.
Wow. Well, the good news is we know you've never sold them because you never sell anything.
I already
Dan,
said I sold them.
okay, fair enough. Dan, was Evolutions playable? And the reason I ask that is because this is what I try to get at through this video. Is a reprint set typically playable as well, or was that just a reprint set just for reprint set's sake?
It was standard legal. Like you could play the cards. You could play the cards in standard if you wanted to. I don't think any of them had tournament impact. At least not to my memory. I can't remember any cards from that set actually doing well in tournaments.
Okay. All right.
Then after that, you have the Sun and Moon era. Like I said, this was really the big glut where you now have so many chase cards per set. Because if we think the end of XY era, like Fates Collide, Steam Siege, Evolutions, we're talking maybe 8 or so full arts as being your chase cards for the set. Sun and Moon era, you're talking, I think, about 15 full arts, 15 rainbows, and 6 or 7 golds, something crazy like that. Sun and Moon releasing halved the price of bulk overnight, and it continued to drop because stores used to buy bulk, so I'm talking like extra commons and uncommons, for 6 to 6.5 cents per card. So you would get $60 to $65 per thousand in extra bulk. And me and Law used to take full advantage of that, where we'd normally be getting a case or 2 per set just from how much bulk we had left over. But stores with Sun and Moon had to open so much of it to fill pre-orders that they just didn't need bulk anymore because they already had so much. Like it used to be, if you wanted to fill pre-orders, like say Steam Siege, the chase card would have been a full art Professor's Research or Professor Sycamore. If someone wants to order 4 of those from you, you probably get 2 or 3 in a case, so you maybe need to open 2 cases and you fill your pre-order for that one person. For Sun and Moon, if someone wants to get a playset of a rainbow card, there's like 2 rainbows per case, and there are maybe 12 rainbows. So there's each rainbow comes one in every 6 cases, maybe one every 3 cases if you're looking at 3 rainbows. So now to fill that one person's pre-order, you have to open 12 cases to get them a playset. So every store just had to open so much more to fill their pre-orders. Players had to open so much more to get the fancy versions of the cards they wanted. Collectors had to open so much more to try and build their own sets that no one wanted bulk anymore, and it just crashed. And now you're lucky if you can get a center card on bulk. Like I know some places that literally one local store to us last year went down to 0.2 cents per card on bulk. And they said the reason was because someone had just come in when they were at like 0.8 cents and sold them 2 million bulk cards. And they was like, well, we just don't need any more. That was a big thing. Let's say we still had full arts going. We've still got golds going now. This was the introduction of rainbows, which I always said the first rainbow card you ever see looks great. You love it. Everyone loves the first rainbow card they see. Then you see the next rainbow card, and it looks the same. And the more rainbow cards you see, the less you like rainbow cards.
Dan, are rainbow cards a Japanese thing? Did they originate from Japan, or is it just because we
Every
talk a lot of
everything originated from Japan.
so in other words, if they talk about a Japanese set and they show the images from a Japanese set that's coming to the United States or whatever, coming around the world, will the art always be the same? They'll just translate? Is it period just like that? Same art, just translation into the English language?
99% of the time. There's a small handful of cards that have exclusive art outside of Japan. Weirdly, China has actually now got more exclusive art, I think, than the US has. But 99% of card art is direct from Japan.
Okay. And then, and how long did the rainbows are not still there anymore, correct? So how long did the rainbows last?
They lasted all of Sun and Moon era and all of Sword and Shield era.
Okay.
So that's
So
8
Scarlet and
years.
Violet, they stopped.
Yeah, they stopped for Scarlet Violet. They did change up the rainbow style a little bit. Like, I think Cosmic Eclipse, they changed how the rainbow res looked, and you could see more detail on the card, and I think the rainbows in that set specifically look a lot nicer. And then moving to Sword and Shield, that's when they started doing rainbow supporters as well. Like I said, that you'd have full art Pokemon and full art supporters. This Sword and Shield started the rainbow supporters, and I think that's where you could really tell how little people liked rainbows, because the rainbow Pokemon were normally at about parity price wise compared to the full arts. Because, like I said, the full arts were usually still just a Pokemon on a blank background, except for those, alt arts that started with Team Up halfway through Sun and Moon. Those are obviously skyrocketing. But in Sword and Shield, even though the rainbow versions of these supporter cards were so much rarer, the full art versions were worth more. Because people just liked how they looked and people didn't like how rainbows looked.
And Sun and Moon, there were the tag team cards in that era, correct?
Yeah, that was what I was saying towards the second half of the era, starting with the set Team Up. They introduced tag team Pokemon. I would say it was GX Pokemon. I think they were tag team GXs. Because Sun and Moon introduced GXs as their kind of replacement for EXs or level X. That was the new mechanic style, but they got the full arts and rainbows and whatever. So starting with the Team Up Pokemon, there would be a special alternate art that was, I think, the same rarity level as Rainbow Rares, but instead of just being the same artwork in a rainbow style and the same rainbow style, it was a fully different, fully exclusive artwork. And those are the most popular cards from that generation by a country mile. If you lay out all of every card from Sun and Moon sets in order of price, it would be all of the alt arts, and then there'd be a huge jump to whatever the next most expensive thing is. Probably a gold trainer or something. But
the tag team cards did not continue into the next era.
No, tag teams and GXs as a whole didn't continue into Sword and Shield. GXs and tag teams were gone and replaced with Vs and VMAXs as the kind of new mechanic that went with it. So it was the VMAXs got the rainbows, I believe. I don't think the regular Vs got the rainbows. So VMAXs got the rainbows and the Vs got the full arts. So for first few Sword and Shield sets, it was kind of just full arts, rainbows, golds again, just with Vs and VMAXs. And then when we got to battle styles, that's when they started introducing those alternate arts, similar to what the tag teams had with their special arts. Some of the Vs and some of the VMAXs got special art versions as well, which again are incredibly popular. Obviously, Evolving Skies is the one that people know. It has all the evolutions. I mean, that was just a ridiculously big set and had some of the most popular Pokemon in it. So those sets were really what put the nail in the coffin of Rainbow Rares for a lot of people, because they were pitched at the same rarity level, was a Rainbow and an Alt Art VMAX. If you were opening, your case would have something like 3 total between Rainbow Rares and Alt Art VMAXs. I mean, about those numbers anyway. But there were so many more rainbows that you had a very low chance of hitting the Alt Art VMAX. And rainbows, there's a lot of rainbows you can get for less than the price of a pack now. So literally, if you hit something if you hit the Umbreon VMAX in a rainbow, it was this is a $10 card. Whereas if I just hit the other Umbreon, which is technically at the same rarity level, even at the time it was a $500-$600 card, I think it just made even more feel bads when you pulled a rainbow. And I think that's, like I say, I'm glad they got rid of rainbows. I really didn't like them. Judges hated rainbows as well. Any judge I've spoke to hated rainbow rares because they said when you're judging a game, if a player calls a judge, you want to be able to walk over, look at the board state, and figure out as quickly as possible what's going on. And when there's 5 different rainbows on the field, you can't do that because they all look the same from 2 feet away. You have to pick up every card and read it to figure out what's going on. Whereas, like with the full arts or the regular arts, you know the artwork well enough of playable cards to know what's going on before you start asking the players questions.
I don't think judges should have an opinion about anything. They're supposed to say impartial, and I'm tired of hearing that they've got opinions. It really doesn't make any sense. If I ever find out that an actual judge that I know has an opinion, I will have them removed from Pokemon before they can say hootenanny, okay? Dan, I'd like to just bring up one thing. I'm a very selfish person, and you've talked for so long, and it's been so interesting, but I need to take a coffee break for a minute and ask you the following question. You know that I own quite a bit of prismatic evolutions. I've just put them aside because I wanted them to be the best thing since sliced bread. When they came out, I thought they would be. I thought they might parallel 151 from the Japanese situation, and therefore they'd be wonderful with the evolutions and everything else, and the rarity and the lack of printing and all the fun hit cards. And so I compare that. So here's what's happening. At the moment, they've declined in value rapidly as more prints are coming out. And we know that other things are coming, like Destined Rivals, and now this new set, which is black and white or something, and it's got amazing cards and all kinds of crazy stuff, and every single card is in an alternative art in the set the first time ever, and all this other stuff you're hearing about. So what created the evolutions? I'm sorry, not the evolutions. What created the Evolving Skies popularity such that it still continues on till today through all of these other amazing sets that have come through? And is there any chance in your mind that Prismatic will have any potential to do the same thing longer term, like whatever we talked about, what Evolving Skies? Wow, that's gone. Another Modelo, please. I'm starting to run dry. What is there any? Can there be any parallel there, Dan, or am I just going to get so wiped out from my gamble on prismatic evolutions?
Well, it's going to depend on, if the amount of people collecting Pokemon continues to grow. Evolving Skies was released mid-pandemic, so it was at a point where Pokemon's printing was at the lowest it had been for a while because they were behind, facilities were having to close for an amount of time, and popularity of Pokemon as a whole was going up. So the demand was outweighing the supply huge amounts, and they didn't have the facilities or anything in place to be able to get more of it out there quickly. It was basically the first print run was most of it. It was so hard to restock anything later on. Prismatic isn't that. They're still printing Prismatic. There's still more products to come out, and they know the popularity of it, so they're going to keep printing it. So I think unless it gets to a point where after Prismatic's been out of print for a while, something explodes the Pokemon collecting space again, and it blows up, I don't think it has the potential to be Evolving Skies level. I think Prismatic will still go up. I think it will be once the printing's done and once we've had a bit of time without it being in print, I think it'll go back up in value. But I don't think it has the potential to be Evolving Skies level. The other thing was, like I said, it was a huge set with so many of these chase cards, which all had low pull rates, and the fact that the stuff you wanted was at the same pull rate level of stuff that no one wants, to the point where it's no one's opening boxes to put a set together because you're just not going to get any of the good stuff, really. So people were just wanting to buy those, alt art evolutions. They weren't wanting to buy all the rest of the stuff. So anyone who had opened stuff, had a gold mine on their hands if they hit the right stuff, because just no one is wanting to open anything anymore because they know that it's an 90+% chance that they just lose all their value and open nothing really of value from a box. So even if there's a good sealed supply out there, no one's going to open it. That might end up being the way it goes with Prismatic, really, because we've already seen it where you've got, like, in Prismatic, you've got the Pokeball reverses and the Master Ball reverses as some level of chase cards. the Master Balls, again, other than like the 9 evolutions, the most of the Master Balls are so low. Like a lot of the Master Balls you can get for less than you can now get a pack for. There's a few other playable cards in there, but out of the 70, I think, Master Balls, there's maybe 10 to 15 are actually even worth more than the pack. And then the SIRs, because people just really want those EVs, some of the other SIRs are down there in price. So they're both sets where you can get, even if you get a hit technically on a good pull, there's a good chance it's not even worth getting in terms of what you're paying for the product. So there are parallels there, but I don't see Prismatic getting up to Evolving Skies level.
That's fine, Dan. It seems like I really blew this one. And I think that my family's going to suffer financially due to a tremendously bad gamble. And that's what I did. And so thank you for shooting it down. Thank you for giving me absolutely no hope. And at
I
this
literally
point,
said it'll go back up, just not to the same
no,
level.
that's fine. That's fine, Dan. You don't have to assuage my concerns anymore. They're already under the table and 6 foot under where they should be. Which era are we in, Dan? I'd like to find out which era we're in at the moment.
Well, we're talking about Sword and Shield era. I should mention, well, Cosmic Eclipse, the last set of Sun and Moon, did also have a set of character rares in it, which were the predecessors to what we now have as the illustration rares. There was a set of those in Cosmic Eclipse, and then towards the end of Sword and Shield era, they kind of brought those back with the Trainer Gallery, which was like the 30-card subset in the few cards where they had what basically equivalent of illustration rares, special illustration rares, and a couple of golds. And then when we moved on to Scarlet Violet era, that's when the set as a whole had illustration rares, full arts, special illustration rares, golds. We got rid of the rainbow rares. And again, we're at a point now where so many of the full arts are worth less than a pack that I would like to see them get rid of it and just have the chase cards be illustrations, special illustrations, and golds. I mean, if they keep the full art supporters, fine. But the fact that we have special illustration supporters now, it's not even that big of a deal because it's the same cards get both. It's not like you have these 5 supporters get full art and these 5 get special illustrations. So I would like to see full arts phase out if we're sticking with illustration rares and special illustration rares, which we are, and I love that. Because like you said, there's a set been announced for Japan, which is based around Black and White and based around the Unova region, and all 156 Pokemon from that generation are going to have a illustration rare or special illustration rare within a set. They've also said that they're going to be selling larger packs, so they're going to have the regular 5-card packs, which is what they have in Japan, but also 35-card booster packs. And those booster packs will guarantee either an illustration rare or a special illustration rare. So I don't think that's something they're likely to bring over here, but Japan is doing that. I don't know how they're going to do that set over here. If I had to guess, I would think it would be something like a Crown Zenith style set where they'd have a small mini set and then one in every 4 packs or something you'd pull a chase card out of this 156 like they had Galarian Gallery, or kind of like they did with the Fate sets, the Shining stuff. That would be my guess on how they end up doing it, but we'll have to wait and see on that.
Interesting. I don't know what that does. I don't know when you have a special illustration rare or whatever of every single card, you feel like they'd be more prevalent in the packs. Like there's no way they can make them as difficult to obtain. You would think there'd be one in a pack or something like that. Just because of, you only can produce so much and still get all those cards out there. At least in my opinion, I don't see how you can have every card in that and then you have one for every 10 packs or 2 per box. The
thing is, because of the fact that they are just alternate versions of existing cards, it doesn't actually matter how rare they make them because players don't need them. Right. Because players can get the regular versions. Like when it was we're talking like Heart Gold, Soul Silver era, those legend cards were pretty expensive at the time because players needed that version. You know, they were chase cards, but there was no lower rarity version that the players could use. In fact, in Japan, when they did the legend cards, you opened both pieces together in the same pack. So you could play the card right out of the pack, but then when they did it the rest of the world, you would get one half of a legend card per box on average. So it was harder to get those, and even then, that still seemed rough for players that needed them. And I've talked before about Rising Rivals with Luxray GL Level X that like every deck needed, and that was maybe one in every 3 boxes, and that felt crazy hard to do at the time. But it was the fact that that hard to pull version was the only version. You know, if there had been a special like one in every 20 box version of that Luxray, it would have brought the price of the other one down because people would be chasing that big one and people would be opening more trying to get that big one. So that's the benefit that they've had since, I think, since Black and White on, is that these rarest chase cards are alternate versions of existing cards. So it brings the price down for players and it gives collectors something else to chase. They can make stuff rarer than they could have, because if they had it where, you know, an alternate art version of a card was the only version, they couldn't make them as rare as they do. Otherwise, it would be impossible for players.
Last question for me. Do you think, I mean, if they indeed do what they say they're going to do, what people are projecting they're going to do, and they're going to have a special illustration rare for every single card in the set, which is so far different than anything they've ever done, wouldn't it / shouldn't it be the case that going forward, every single next set should look exactly the same as that? Only because it would be such a disappointment from an art standpoint if you didn't maintain that same kind of quantity, when people would say, well, gosh, this was such a great set, this new Black and White set, and now everything after it's just junk. It's, you know, because we know what they've done and what they're capable of doing.
No, because it's another one of the things where continuing to do something makes it less special. You know, we've seen how much people still love 151 because they did, you know, the full Generation 1 Pokedex in order, and it's the only time they've done it. If we had another set 2 years after 151 where it was like, oh, we're again doing every Generation 1 Pokemon, it's all different art, it's not the same as 151, but it's that same gimmick of everything in Pokedex order, it would hurt both sets, because the people who were just coming into it now would go for that new set. They wouldn't bother looking at the old 151 because they're doing it with the new one. And the people who already had the old one wouldn't do it again. So it's one of the things where the more you do it, the more it dilutes the amount of people actually doing one specific thing. And I like that they're making this as a special thing of, this is the Black and White special set. We're doing it for every Pokemon in this generation. I mean, maybe they do it again in a couple of years' time. You know, if we get to say they do a remake of another generation of games, maybe they go, okay, well, now we're going to do the Johto set, or we're going to do the Kalos set, and in this one we're going to do every Pokemon from that generation, and they space it out and people can go to different generations, but doing it every set would just really, really hurt it.
A lot of Pokemon company executives watch us, Dan. I've been told that many times. And so for those that are watching right now, I would like to suggest just, you know, something you might think about is, Dan mentioned the idea of the Pokédex order. Maybe we go reverse order. Maybe we actually go like, you know, backwards from a normal order for a different set, just to change it up some, because I know that Dan likes things limited, and this would be a way of limiting something and a unique style and change from anything that's been done before. Little unusual, little you know, unorthodox, but that's okay. That's what we do as Pokemon company executives, trying to maintain the largest franchise in the world. So Dan, let me just finish my part by saying thank you so much for a walk through the eras tour. I don't know what you guys thought about it. If you hated it, remember this: you didn't have to pay thousands of dollars for a front row arena seat ticket. It was free. It was basically free, unless, you know, you go to Dan's Patreon and pay him money to give him a few dollars so he can keep doing this, like a GoFundMe for a guy that just likes to spout Pokemon information. So, but thank you for watching. We appreciate it. I hope you found it interesting, insightful. I did. But then I think, you know, it's insightful to watch a squirrel bury its nuts. So, Dan, anything else from you?
No, this has been a very long one, and I already know that I have 100 images to make, so I think we should end it here.
Okay. Good to see you, Dan. Good to see everybody. Appreciate you guys being with us as always. Bye-bye.
See you guys.
Thanks for listening to Coffee Talks with Dan Norton and David Person, with music by More Than Never and artwork by Lore Norton. A special thanks to all our Patreon members. Join us again next time.
But they don't want you to.